It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everybody. I'm Kusha Navidar filling in for Brian today. It seems like every other day there is some big news in the AI world, usually in the context of whether or not AI functions will replace human jobs. But this latest story feels different, at least to me. On April 7th, Anthropic announced they would not be releasing their new AI model, Claude Mythos Preview, to the public because of cybersecurity concerns. One of Anthropic's researchers wrote in a Mythos assessment, quote, "This time the threat is not hypothetical. Advanced language models are here." So as part of the Brian Lehrer Show's ongoing coverage of cybersecurity and digital safety in our lives, let's hear more about this from Miranda Nazzaro, The Hill's senior technology reporter who covers artificial intelligence, online misinformation, data privacy, other topics in the overlapping spheres of tech and politics. She also co-authors The Hill's technology newsletter. Miranda, hi, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Kusha. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So help us unpackage this. What exactly is Mythos?
Sure. So Mythos is not like the AI models that you and I may see, like a ChatGPT or even a Claude, which is another one of Anthropic's chatbots. It's actually a model that's purpose is to spot cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So basically what this means is it's taking the job that, say, a cybersecurity vendor itself would have done of trying to find different areas where, it might be a critical infrastructure, an internet web browser might be vulnerable to attacks. So on the outset of this, it looks like this could be a very useful product. We are seeing it can basically work 10 times faster than one human alone trying to spot vulnerabilities in any given software. But on the flip side, has a lot of risks, given that if it's in the wrong hands, then it makes it much easier for hackers to basically spot these vulnerabilities and then hack software, infrastructure, that sort of thing. So as you mentioned, it does feel different because this is very security based. This is the sort of things that we've been hearing about for months, if not years, about both kind of the pros and cons when it comes to artificial intelligence.
So let me kind of summarize that there. Like a Claude or a ChatGPT might help you write a better email, for instance.
Sure.
Or like, hey, plan my trip to New York City, for instance. But you're saying Mythos is about cybersecurity. It is a model that is probably used by IT professionals, companies that are worried about cybersecurity. Is that kind of distinction the fair summary there?
Absolutely. You're not going to see it necessarily. Obviously, it's not even being released to the public yet, but even if it was, you're probably not going to be seeing your average everyday consumer going to use Mythos, and you probably never will. I mean, I don't want to make assumptions. AI is pretty unpredictable, but
Sure.
yeah, it's really, I think sometimes when the general public thinks of AI, they just assume it is that chatbot function. But something like this, it can run on its own. It doesn't necessarily need human oversight all the time. It's more of a tool than a chatbot, which most of us are familiar with.
Okay, and you brought up something that I think really hits the nail on the head when you said the public is probably never going to see this, because what really grabbed people's attention with Mythos, my attention at least, was the fact that Anthropic chose to not release their new AI to the public, but instead warn of its power. So how unusual is that?
It's interesting because we actually do see limited rollouts a lot with technology products. It's just that this one, given the very broad statements that Anthropic is making about its capabilities, and frankly, scary statements, I think is what grabbed people's attentions. I spoke with a lot of technologists who actually are usually involved in these sorts of rollouts, and it is not all that uncommon, but because of this risk about having it in the hands of the public is very dangerous, I think is what is freaking people out. Now, it's not clear if Anthropic will ever actually release it to the public. I think it would be pretty wild to think that this could be limited for years and years. But I do think in the interim, they are taking a very cautious approach, giving it to other technologists to basically test out and see if they can spot their vulnerabilities in their own products as well. So we're seeing the government also potentially going to be using this. So it's not that uncommon, but I think just given the dangers of what we don't know is what's freaking people out.
Yeah, terms like freaking people out and scary are big words, and I want to make sure listeners understand this. Make sure that I understand it really. What is so scary that Anthropic has said?
As you mentioned, the quote that you said in the beginning about how the threat, they call it the threat, is not hypothetical, it is here. It's the idea, Anthropic is suggesting that this tool could make it much easier and much quicker for our foreign adversaries, essentially, hackers, doesn't necessarily have to be foreign adversaries,
Sure.
to be able to take down entire infrastructure. So, what I mean by that is it could be web browsers, it could be the infrastructure of the big banks on Wall Street. And essentially, that raises concerns about data. It raises concerns about, financial problems, hacking into and transferring money out of. These are all hypothetical examples, or at least I think.
Right.
But these are the sorts of things that Anthropic is suggesting. There's a reason why Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent convened a bunch of Wall Street leaders just days after Anthropic spoke with the government about this, because I think the banks specifically are a great example of this, of the risks that come with if their software were to be hacked, essentially. So they are, I know that the freaked out and scary can be kind of these broad terms, but I think of it as a cybersecurity hacker being given the keys to do their job 10 times faster, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it, I think. Listeners, we can take some calls about this for Miranda Nazzaro, The Hill's senior technology reporter. Do you listening right now, do you have a question about Mythos? Call or text us at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. If we have some IT folks out there who work on cybersecurity, what are you making of the news about Mythos? Call or text us. We're at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Okay, so Miranda, throughout all of this, there has been some skepticism of Anthropic's true intentions. I'm thinking Katie Miller, a former top advisor at Doge and aide to Elon Musk, wrote in a post on X, quote, "It sounds like Anthropic is running a giant public relations scheme to manipulate industry fears, a playbook Dario has used in the past," unquote. She's referring there to Anthropic's chief executive, Dario Amodei. Is that the prevalent reaction to this, that it's like a marketing ploy, PR stunt?
I would say that there is a contingent of folks in DC who do believe it's a PR stunt. You mentioned Katie Miller, David Sachs, the White House's now former AI and cryptocurrency czar, also expressed this skepticism. But I don't think that it's as widespread as individuals like Miller and Sachs might be suggesting. I was curious about this myself and asked people within the administration as well as those who have recently departed. And it seems like the White House is actually taking this threat pretty seriously. I think Anthropic is in a really weird position right now where they're sort of caught in a culture war. They have an ongoing court battle with the Pentagon over even allowing their technology to be used by the military as well as the entire federal government. And I think that Miller and Sachs were really sort of clinging on to this culture war because there seems to be quite the distrust of Dario and his intentions. So I don't think that that's as much of a widespread sentiment, but I do think it's something that's important to recognize. Axios reported this morning that Dario is meeting with the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, today, and that is very significant because it's felt like Anthropic is been sort of blacklisted in DC, but it's clear that the White House still wants to engage with them. So I think it goes both ways, but I think in this particular instance, you're actually seeing the majority of people in the White House's orbit want to engage on this and at least want to make sure that it's contained.
You literally read my mind because I was going to bring that up. Like an hour before the show started, I read about the scoop from Axios. Listeners, just to put a point on it that Miranda mentioned there. There's news that Amodei is meeting with the White House today, as Axios put it, to make peace, because a month ago, Anthropic was in the news because of a dispute with the Pentagon over what their AI can be used for, especially in a military setting. Miranda, I want to hear more about that. What do you think that meeting means? Because at the same time, there is this huge culture war among AI companies as well, where Anthropic is making a line in the sand, it appears, to say we care about the ethics behind AI in a way that would limit the way that we want government to be able to use it for war making, basically. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, Anthropic has really tried to set itself apart from the other AI firms by putting this whole safety first mission first in line. We saw, various technology leaders have been to the White House to visit with Trump and other staff over the past year, but you'll notice that officials from Anthropic, it's usually a little less. They are still present often, but it does not feel like they are on the same page ideologically. Anthropic is unlike a lot of the AI firms where they actually do support some type of regulation when it comes to AI development, whereas we see a lot of tech firms, as well as the administration, promote more of this light touch regulation, basically letting developers innovate as they choose because they believe it's a matter of whether that's national security, keeping up with China in the race. And so I think today's meeting is a very, very big sign. You can't get too much higher besides Susie Wiles, besides meeting
Right.
the president face to face. I mean, Wiles is sort of the brain behind a lot of the administration's actions. And I think the fact, I don't know at this point who invited or who initiated this, but the fact that they are taking this meeting, it seems now that the dust has settled on this Anthropic Pentagon battle, that maybe there is room for some sort of reconciliation here, and that I don't know what this means for the court case itself, but it seems like the federal government, not necessarily the defense agency, is feeling like it is important to have Anthropic involved in the conversation. And whether that's because of the threat or they think that the Pentagon deal went too far, I do think it's a major step and potentially the first of what could be a rekindling. I don't want to speak too soon, but at least more of a cordial understanding between the White House and Anthropic.
Yeah, at least optically, it appears to be a big deal. Listeners, this is the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today. And we're speaking to Miranda Nazzaro, senior technology reporter at The Hill, about Anthropic's Mythos model. Miranda, we're starting to get some texts and calls in. I'm going to read a text first, then go to a call. The text says, I'm totally freaked out about Mythos. People compare it to a nuclear arms race. It's only a few weeks before there's a DeepSeek version of Mythos. And then what? Everyone's home router is hacked. The best defense is to keep updating, but not everything can be updated quickly and often. And we thank the texter for sharing that anxiety that they're feeling. And I want to pivot from there to a caller, David in Kingston, New York. David, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, welcome.
Hi, great. Well, thanks for taking my call. My comment is simply that if this thing is so dangerous, it takes nothing. It takes no imagination to get the idea that it's going to get into the wrong hands. There's plenty of people working with this at the Anthropic and all over the place. And any one of these people are just going to, they do it as a blackmail or ransom, but they ultimately take the thing and put it into the wrong hands, and then it's out there everywhere, and then the stuff really hits the fan. And with regard to what you guys were recently talking about, this is going to Trump and Washington. Well, that's probably the worst place for it to go, because they're going to make totally the wrong decisions, bad decisions with it. And then, like I say, it's going to be out there, and the stuff is really going to hit the fan. I hope you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, David, I appreciate what you're trying to say. What I hear you saying is that there is not just risk, there's almost like a certainty that it could get into the wrong hand because it's so easy. And Miranda, I guess hearing the text first, hearing David, it makes me wonder when it would ever be safe enough for any of these models as they're getting more powerful to be released to the public. How is that conversation within the walls of these companies going?
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate both questions there. And I think they do highlight the anxieties that these sort of veiled messaging that comes out from these AI companies where, they're talking about these hypothetical scenarios. I think that it's important to note, I don't think, at least from my perspective, that these AI firms, Anthropic included, are suggesting that they are going to be able to control this sort of technology from being developed in other forms in other countries into foreign adversaries or bad actors' hands. I think that they are trying to give this technology right now to some of the biggest companies and some of the government and banks because they want them to use it as a defensive mechanism, basically prepare your infrastructure because yes, the inevitable is our foreign adversaries, bad actors, are probably already working on similar technology. Somebody mentioned DeepSeek earlier, and
Mm.
that's that is the reality is that China is the closest to the US when it comes to how far they are in their development, and they probably are working on something like this. In terms of releasing it to the public, I think there is a chance they will not release something like this, or if they do, it might not be until, say, they get evidence that our adversaries or bad actors already have these capabilities. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that these companies are also sort of admitting it's inevitable, but they're trying to get ahead on the defensive side of things, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, they're trying to
Yeah.
play what cards they have, knowing that this technology is going to improve inevitably, and the best that maybe they feel is put it in the hands of the big institutions that affect a lot of people to help as on the defensive play proactively. I think that's what I heard from you. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's in I don't know if it's that Anthropic necessary. I don't even exactly know how the general public would use this model, I guess
Right.
is what I'm also trying to say. It feels very structured for corporations, for companies, for governments. So even if they were to release it, I don't think there is any benefit until they know it's not going to be giving bad actors a competitive advantage.
Got it. Miranda, you had mentioned before that we had seen a strong response from the government with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell calling an emergency meeting with Wall Street executives. What exactly were they discussing?
Yeah, so as far as we know from multiple reports at this point, basically Besson and Powell were telling these Wall Street companies about what they've heard about Mythos, which we know now that the White House, including Besson and Vice President Vance, were briefed days before this, before it actually went public, basically telling these banks, there is this new cyber threat coming, whether it's Mythos directly and or just other bad actors developing similar technology. You need to essentially be amping up your own security. And this includes giving them access to a model like Mythos that allows it to kind of pinpoint where those vulnerabilities are. And I believe it was Bloomberg reported that Besson actually encouraged the use of Mythos to be doing this. So
Mm.
again, they're really trying, I think, to hone in on that defensive side of it, using it as a tool before it becomes a weapon, if that makes sense.
It does. And when I think of Wall Street, I think of power. And so if federal leaders are going to talk to such a big source of power about, hey, you need to prepare for this, does that change how you view the urgency of this? Or for you, is it more like, yeah, that makes sense. Eventually this like flag was going to be raised towards Wall Street. Tell me about that.
I think that it is expected, but I also think while it is expected, given we've been hearing about warnings about AI and the security risks for years now at this point, It feels like a long time coming, but at the same time, I think it's unique given the stance of the administration. I spoke with Dean Ball earlier this week. Dean Ball was one of the authors of Trump's White House AI action plan. He was in the White House until last August. So he really got a first look at the administration's policies. And something he told me is that the administration actually, or at least people in the administration, not all of the administration, believed that AI would soon plateau, that its development has basically peaked. And Ball did not agree with this assessment, and he said, we are nowhere near the peak of AI development. And he believes that Mythos was sort of a wake-up call. He said it is notable given how much action the White House has already taken in the past 2 weeks over this, and that it seems like they feel like, okay, we need to jump in here, get involved because this is not being handled. He said the administration, quote, was not prepared to deal with this threat. So I think it is expected for a lot of people who watch technology closely, but I also think it speaks to the urgency, just given the administration hadn't done a whole lot on this before this moment.
I'm looking at the clock. There are a bunch more questions I want to go through. This is so interesting, and you're
Great.
providing so much good information. So I want to talk about Project Glasswing too, because this is an important part of the puzzle. Even with the strong government response, the biggest response seems to be coming from Anthropic themselves with Project Glasswing. That's an initiative that brings together all the huge AI companies. We're talking like Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, just name a few. Tell us quickly about Project Glasswing. What's the goal?
Sure. So Anthropic announced Project Glasswing on the same day that they made the public statements about Mythos. And essentially, it's supposed to be a collaborative uh, project between different companies, as you mentioned, Apple, Microsoft, that are going to be using Mythos for its own for its own defense of its infrastructure. For example, Microsoft is going to use it to see if they can spot vulnerabilities in their own cybersecurity space. And they're going to bring those findings to Anthropic, and then Anthropic says that they will share this with the public. So it's essentially one big collaboration. It's a lot of AI firms, but it's also some cybersecurity firms like CrowdStrike, as well as JP Morgan Chase is the one bank that they've publicly listed there. So it's basically saying, hey, we need all of you to test this out. Tell us how well it works. Tell us what could be better. We can improve the model, and then we'll tell the public about it. Again, maybe this is the first iteration before they release it to the public. That's not very clear yet, but this thing is also pretty typical. Tech companies will often collaborate. I know they seem like competitors, but they do often want to share their product, want to improve it, because the reality is that they all kind of need each other in one way or another.
Right.
An AI company is not an AI company without the cloud, without the software and chips.
Doesn't
and blah,
exist
blah.
in a vacuum. Yeah, I totally hear that.
Yeah.
Let's go to Lyron in Long Island City. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. So just a bit of background. I work as an artificial intelligence management systems implementer, which is
wonderful.
basically creating the policy around implementing artificial intelligence so that organizations certify against an international standard.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of Mythos creating, this concern, I think is really great. And it obviously is a concern in and of itself, and it's a very special concern. But I think that it also represents a chance, especially for the current administration in the United States, to start thinking about guardrails, because they have been very non-guardrail oriented about artificial intelligence. In fact, sort of changing some executive orders from the previous administration to open up and create a more laxed environment. So I really think it's good. One of the big issues that I would say, if you were just to erase Mythos out of the current conversation, is the fact that agentic AI is already being used for large-scale attacks.
And agentic AI there is AI that can has the agency basically to make choices on its own, to do actions on its own, right?
That's correct. So it can work autonomously, and it can work when you are not there, unlike if you're interacting with the GPT that you're feeding it information and waiting for a response. With agentic AI, you give it a goal, and it breaks that goal into tasks and then can work on it autonomously. And those who are bad actors are actually already using such tools to work at orders of magnitude, that's millions of times faster than they were able to do.
Let me pause you there. I so appreciate your call and bringing that up. I think guardrails is something that really comes out to me when I listen to you. And we're running out of time, so I want to make sure that we give Miranda a chance to respond to this. We've got a lot of things moving here, Miranda. We've got Scott Bessent, Jerome Powell warning Wall Street. We have Project Glasswing. And guardrails really sticks out to me that Lyron just mentioned. AI regulation, do you think this all could spur action at the federal level? I know it's a long answer, but what's your 30-second version of it?
I get it. I think that this has certainly raised the issue or brought it to the forefront for both the White House and Congress. I think they've been wanting to create a federal framework for a while now. I think that this presents a really good opportunity to say, hey, we have this threat right now. We really need to control this technology before it gets into the wrong hands. I do think it could spur momentum, but I also am realistic. And as somebody who works on in the Capitol most days and speaks to lawmakers, it is a very long process, and there are a lot of political arguments right now when it comes to how we should do this. I think many agree there needs to be some sort of regulation, but I do think it's a long road. I don't want to be pessimistic, but Congress isn't even able to fund a government agency right now. There's just so much disagreement. So, we could see more action from the White House, but Congress, I'm not quite sure yet. It's going to be soon.
Yeah, definitely not a 30-second answer for them. I can tell you that. And I appreciate you trying to wrap that all up. And Lyron, thank you so much for bringing that up. Sorry that we had to cut off your call, but we have to leave it there for today. Thank you, Miranda Nazzaro, the Hill's senior technology reporter. Thank you.
Thank you so much.